I'm Alexis Schwerha with Campus Reform, and you're watching 5 Big Questions. Indiana has passed and signed into law House Bill 1190 that implements free speech and protections for college campuses. The bill bans free speech zones as well as prohibits student organizations from being discriminated against because of political affiliation. Joining me now to discuss the bill and its implication for protecting freedom of speech on college campus is Alliance Defending Freedom Senior Counsel Zach Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, to jump into the conversation, can you break down for our viewers why bills such as House Bill 1190 needs to be passed if the First Amendment already guarantees freedom of speech?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what we've seen all across the country with these incidences of disruptions on campus, one of the first questions that always arises is what you just asked, which is, we have the First Amendment. Why are these things happening? But the reality is that it's one thing to have the First Amendment, and it's another thing to have the First Amendment applied faithfully by college administrators. So many times what we see is that despite having robust First Amendment protections and great precedents from the Supreme Court, college administrators are more concerned about protecting certain types of speech and certain types of behavior, so then they craft policies, put them into student codes of conduct, and these policies are oftentimes outside the bounds of what is allowable or permitted by the First Amendment and or what should be permitted by the First Amendment.
So, the bill also allows for universities to enforce time, place, and manner restrictions. Can you explain what these restrictions are and how they impact student speech?
Sure. So with every bill, with every kind of a bill that enforces a right with respect to speech and public forums, the Supreme Court has been clear that those permissions are always going to be subject to what's called time, place, and manner restrictions. So the idea being that with any restriction is that some of them may be permissible, provided that they are, again, limited in time, place, and manner, meaning that if they are applied equally, could be content neutral and viewpoint neutral. So a good example of this on campus would be if they said that you have to leave the quad by midnight at night, or there can't be amplification devices used next to classrooms when classes are going on. Those are good examples of how a time, place, and manner restriction would interact with a law that protects free speech.
Right, and here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, we cover extensively on free speech issues that students face on their college campuses. And according to a Speech First report, we found that 80% of college students self-censor because they're afraid of being discriminated against or saying the wrong thing in front of their professors or their peers. So in your opinion, what effect do you think that bills such as this Indiana bill are going to have for the culture of free speech on campuses?
It's one of the main important parts of this legislation, is that what we want to do is not only to correct the laws or to make sure the laws or the regulations are compliant with existing Supreme Court jurisprudence, but we also want to impact culture. Because the reality is, if we have a whole bunch of laws that aren't being followed or in word or in deed, then we're not really solving the problem. So the idea behind the bill is to, not only is it setting the laws straight, it's then requiring universities to implement these policies. And it's also requiring them to put these policies in student handbooks, requiring that all staff be trained with respect to the university's policies on free speech. And the idea being that this is at least one more step in the right direction of creating a culture of free speech. And that's kind of the ultimate goal here.
I'm really happy you touched on the training part of free speech as well, because here at Campus Reform, we've been seeing multiple schools do these type of free speech trainings. However, as we saw at Iowa State, their training actually included training professors on what could be reported as maybe a violation of their policies. What impact does this have on freedom of speech?
Sure. When groups and schools are requiring students to undergo certain sorts of training, they can absolutely end up restricting students' rights to free expression. And we see this a lot of times through the implementation of certain speech codes, creating a certain list of words that students can or can't use, or now even a certain set of ideas that they can't express. And so the hope is that with bills like the one we just passed in Indiana, we can not only change the laws for the good, but also change the culture for the good to help discourage or dissuade administrators from doing those sorts of trainings on campus.
And then to wrap us up here, are there any similar bills that are being considered or being passed that are going to have similar protections for freedom of speech?
Yeah, fortunately, the provisions of the bill that was passed in Indiana, at least one of those provisions have passed in over 20 states now. So we are making some progress on that front. They're currently considering a very similar bill in Idaho that's very close to making it to the governor's desk. And so hopefully, we can keep this effort going. But to this point, with a little over 20 states, it's gone really well. But at this point, we're looking to see what we can do, not only, as mentioned, to correct these laws, but make sure these cultures, that it trickles down into culture so that the laws are impacting more than just the laws on the books.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for breaking that down, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.